mornings are filled with interesting speakers. We've had people tell us about the Gaza Strip, Kurdistan, local events, and a whole variety. There's a welcome mat out for any of you who wish to join and be with us in PDA. Admittedly, it's in Corrales right now, but hopefully we'll also get a chapter started in Albuquerque. The size of this crowd tells you how many people love Dede.
It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker tonight. She was 16 years in the state senate representing our North Valley. What stamina! Yes. What stamina! For any of you who've gone up to the legislature and sat in those hearings, she sat in them all the time. She accomplished signature legislation in a number of areas. Insurance rates, health insurance was a big objective for her, graduated driver's license, ethics reform, public finance reform for campaign reform. Notice that word that keeps cropping up. She was a sterling progressive representing us in the state senate, and we know that she's not going to stop. This book is evidence of the fact that she's not going into full retirement, and we are so happy about that. She can tell us so much better than I can about what she has to say tonight, so I'm just going to turn the meeting over to her. Thank you.
This is so special to me to be in this room, and of course this is my old stomping ground. I have been in this room. I think I have etched my initials into the bathroom. I've been here so often and coped with the poor acoustics in the room, so I'll try to speak up as well as I can. But you know, you all have been there at the legislature too. Many of you have been there on the opposite side of the desk than I have been, but we've all been there together. And in this crowd are some of the people who have been my mentors for several decades, and as well as constituents, and as well as some of the younger people who will be taking our cause into the future. And so that's a very special thing for me, and I want to thank you. And I especially want to recognize and thank Fred Harris, who really encouraged me and helped me to write this book.
I was among the younger group that's come.
Well, I was asked tonight to talk about not just my book, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but not too much because it's not quite ready for publication. It'll be in the UNM Press Warehouse December 13th. They come. And so it'll be there for Christmas buying. And I have circulated a sheet that you can use to order. And I think that I'm going to have a hot off the press hot chocolate party in December at a gallery downtown. So those of you who are on my email list or sign up for the thing and it's going around tonight, I'll keep you informed of that as the day comes on. But anyway, I have been asked to talk about context for the upcoming legislative session and try to somehow tie together some of the lessons that I learned and included in my book with what I think is coming up in this session. And frankly, I'm glad to do it for progressives because I think we as progressives really get stuck on the issues and live and die on the issues, and sometimes forget that the process and the context and the history of the issues are very advancing those issues. Tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the context of some of the things that are coming up. And this context is mostly drawn from the book that I wrote called Inside the New Mexico Senate, Boots, Suits, and Citizens. And I want to tell you that subtitle was selected, but the other subtitle that I had thought of for the book was Reform and Resistance. And Boots, Suits, and Citizens seemed a little sexier. So remember that. Remember that, hoping for greater sales amongst those constituencies. But it really is a book about how reformers and progressives can advance things through the legislature. And it's the story of how during the last 20 years, and I do reach back a little bit further than my term there, which started in 1997, reformers have taken on big tobacco, big pharma, the NRA, national drug czars to get medical marijuana, the criminal justice establishment to repeal the death penalty, and even cockfighters, who were perhaps the fiercest enemies of all. Anyway, the last chapter of the book is actually called A Handbook for Tackling the Unfinished Agenda. And it includes tips for reformers. And it's sort of like the book, VW Repair for the Complete Idiot, from the 1960s. And now, what I consider to be the updated version of that, which is Excel for dummies. They have, in my case, web marketing for dummies. And they have everything, even anger management for dummies. But I digress. Tonight's homily, so to speak, is to help you put the upcoming session into some kind of perspective. So first, I'll have to tell you what I think is coming up during the session. And I'm really not the one to tell you. And I'm hoping that maybe you'll get folks that are legislators to come and tell you about what they're introducing and what's coming up. And Bill O'Neill, my successor, who represents this area now, has a few bills that I'll tell you about. But the first thing is that it's a short session, as you know. It's primarily going to be a budget and taxation session. Nothing can be on the agenda unless it is put on the call by the governor. And that means that individual bills introduced by legislators have to have a message from the governor. Otherwise, the agenda is just a budget and taxation measure. So the budget this year, there is, I think, it's reported a $280 million overage, and that's pretty good from what we've been through in the past number of years. But what's happened, of course, is the price of gas, oil and gas, is dropping, and also there's a great deal of uncertainty as to whether the sequester is going to be permanent. And that would have a real disproportionate effect in here in New Mexico. So there will be, I think, a conservative feeling about whether we should spend that money or save it. There will also be some time spent on dealing with the aftermath of the big budget, the big tax cut bill that passed during the last session of the legislature on the last day. And you remember that. This has caused consternation amongst local governments who will be asked to come up with the revenue because the hold harmless clause from the repeal of the food tax, the hold harmless clause was done away with. in that big tax package. And so now cities have to come up with the extra cash, and there is even some talk about a repeal of the exclusion of food from the gross receipts tax, so that cities can get that revenue. So I would be looking for that. Also, education obviously is going to be a very big issue. We're hearing about it every day. We're hearing about teacher evaluations and how, teachers are resigning up in Espanola. Today in the paper, there was news that even a Tea Party candidate or a Tea Party Rio Rancho school board member and a progressive got together and said, Hannah Scandera has got to go. So I think we will be hearing some more about those teacher evaluations. We're also going to be, I think, playing Groundhog Day with the third grade retention. Again, that the governor is going to put that on the call. And also, we will once again be asking for a constitutional amendment to provide more funding for early childhood. So this is the third year. Maybe the fourth. Is it the third, Bill?
I thought
I think it's the third. Maybe people know that. Third, okay, yeah. And also there will be an attempt, I think, to somehow fix the lottery fund, which is now 27 million short. And that's going to be very difficult because there are legislative guardians of that fund that don't want to change the eligibility requirements, that don't want to change the amount of scholarships that people could get, regardless of their income. So, water, I think the governor was down here at the Nature Center yesterday, talking about how she's going to do a big capital outlay package for water projects statewide. Of course, I think there will be pushback from our victory yesterday with late-term abortion. I think the anti-abortion forces will be back in the legislature, and I think the DOMA forces will be back in the legislature too. As you know, the governor wants to make that constitutional amendment to put that on the ballot. I know that Common Cause and Bill O'Neill, my successor, they're going to be also trying to continue the reform agenda when it comes to lobbyists, when it comes to fixing public finance system, which is broken because of some national court decisions, and also gain greater transparency to reveal the contributors to super PACs who are active here in New Mexico and who will be very active this coming next year. So in order to find out exactly what's going to be on the agenda, I forget, maybe Penny or Cliff, do you know, what's the first day that bills can be pre-filed? I think it's
December 16th.
December 16th. Okay, so you can go on the website and look to see what people are introducing. And sometimes people will introduce legislation knowing that they probably won't get a message from the governor, but they want to do it anyway to make a statement. So, all right, what I'm going to do now is try to give you 10 pieces of context that you can use to sort of fit in what's going to be happening during this legislative session. And the first one has to do with structure and the fact that New Mexico's legislature is a citizen legislature. It's a citizen legislature with very short sessions where the legislators are volunteers. They are not professionals. They are not paid a salary. They're paid per diem, and they're paid some mileage. They do not have staff except for during the legislative session. There is temporary staff. Now, this sounds great, doesn't it? I mean, it's ordinary citizens coming in with their own individual points of view. Some are ranchers, some are realtors. Well, you know, it sounds very good, but it actually has skewed the legislature in a very conservative direction. The structure was set up in 1912 when New Mexico's Constitution was written, and it hasn't changed much since. The short session and the sessions in January, basically 30, 60 days, were designed for ranchers and farmers. This was the off-season. This was the winter when they were not planting or harvesting crops. But now, of course, you know, today, these short sessions, and I don't know how many of you have been there on the last day of any legislative session. You know how frustrating it is because time runs out and there are hundreds and hundreds of bills left on the table. And it's very difficult to get things passed, and that wasn't by accident. If you wanted to design a system to have the fewest number of bills, this is the perfect way to do it. And we haven't been able to change it. You know, and the legislators are unpaid. They're volunteers, except for you know, this per diem and the mileage that we get, or we have gotten. And what does that really mean? What that means, I found, is that the people who are able to serve are the people who are able to subsidize their own service, or they have a husband or a wife to subsidize their own service. I could never have served in the legislature if my husband wasn't a home builder and worked on that. Other people are retired, or they have the kind of business where they're the boss, they're consultants, or they are the boss and they can put somebody else in charge. You don't get, you know, the ordinary working stiffs that are a little bit more representative of New Mexico. Now, the fact also that there is no personal staff during the out season has real repercussions as well. Legislators are pretty much left on their own, especially if they're not a committee chair, but if they're just a rank and file member, to get the information themselves, and to also, frankly, to pay for their dinners, to pay for their hotels. And what happens? Well, human nature takes over, and the people that they're around are lobbyists and other legislators. And so the system creates a dependence on lobbyists, both for information, for friendship, and for for your next meal, frankly. So what develops is a kind of insider, and legislators are always talking. If you've been on the listen to the floor, they're talking about what a happy family we are here, and that family includes the staff, but it also includes the lobbyists. And last year we had 670, or this year actually, there were 673 registered lobbyists. That's, over 6 to 1. We did a little study of those. There are about 40 to 60, I would say, professional lobbyists. Many of them have more than one client, maybe as many as 25 to 30 clients. 82 of them this past year were from out of state. 26 were former legislators. And 5 of the top lobbyists were actually related to legislators, and often legislators in top positions. So I want to recommend to you this book, or this report that just came out from Common Cause, and I must confess that I helped them write this report. But it really does connect the dots between the activities of lobbyists and their contributions and their expenditures and the outcome. of bills and the votes of bills in the area of oil and gas, agribusiness, banking, and the trial lawyers are included in here as well. So it's on the Common Cause website. You can look at it there, or you can download it. So I think that's one thing, one piece of content, the structure. You really need to understand that. And then, of course, this year, even more than most years, politics will be coloring the legislative session. This year, of course, is a gubernatorial election year, and other statewide offices are up as well. And in the Senate, for example, there are 3 candidates. Maybe there's more than that, but anyway, there are 2 gubernatorial candidates. There's 1 candidate for the state auditor, and I think that's all. And then, of course, the Attorney General is running for governor too. Well, each one of those people will have legislation that they want to highlight, that they want to publicize. And the Attorney General, of course, has bills in the legislature as well. And what that means is that those bills probably will attract a great deal more opposition and discussion from the Republicans, but also from within the Democratic Party, because this is a competitive thing. We're competing for the spotlight here. And of course, look for any bill sponsored by a gubernatorial candidate to get a rather chilly reception from the governor. So you might keep that in mind when you're asking people to sponsor legislation for you. I remember the second year I was there was 1998, and I was carrying a bill for Tom Udall, who was the AG at the time. And I couldn't understand why it was just creating so much floor debate. It was just hostile, almost. When I realized that Roman Maez was running for Congress against Tom Udall, and he and his allies were shooting at this bill as a way of shooting down Tom Udall. So expect more conflict, expect longer floor sessions, and more debate. Okay, thirdly, the process. Your issue, your bill, is always presented within the process of the legislature. And so you have to understand how to get the different kinds of legislation passed or defeated. And it is a convoluted process. To say the least, they're laughing, with conference committees, concurrence votes, and there are many different types of legislation. There's a straight-out bill, there's a memorial, there's a constitutional amendment. All of them require special treatment and different kind of process, different number of votes needed to get them passed. So one thing to remember, though, is that the committee system is everything. The committee system is all. And the committee chairs are extremely important to the process. They can schedule your bill or not. And sometimes in the Senate and the House, there are committees structured specifically to kill legislation. Perhaps you have heard of this. Perhaps you have read about it in the Albuquerque Journal on Sunday, in which the big secret was given away, and that is that we have been able to kill parental notification and many anti-abortion bills in some of the committees to which it was referred because the votes were not there, or the chairman just didn't have time to give that bill. So it depends upon what kind of committee chair you have, though. I was very lucky, in my view, to be able to slow down some of these anti-abortion bills. But ultimately, because I believed in the process, I thought that they did deserve a vote in the committee. And so sometimes they won and sometimes they lost. Mostly they lost. So you have to understand that process because, you know, killing bills can be a bad thing too. There was a lot of complaint last session and the session before about the Senate Finance Committee because the Senate Finance Committee didn't hear the Early Childhood Amendment, refused to hear it. That committee has a history of doing that. And it did it the year before with the same Early Childhood Amendment. And for several years before that, when it came to pieces of health care legislation, like the establishment of a health care authority, John Arthur Smith refused to hear it. And so consequently, even though there was a great deal of bipartisan support for that, it never made it to the floor and it never passed. Okay, the other piece of the process has to do with constitutional amendments, because you're going to see a number of constitutional amendments this time, because it's very tempting to use constitutional amendments in a situation where you have a Democratic legislature and a Republican governor, because a constitutional amendment does not require the governor's signature. However, it does require an extraordinary majority to pass. And it's not, you know, as bad as 3/5 of the vote, but it requires a majority of all of the senators and all of the legislators. The dirty little secret that many of you know is that you can pass legislation with very few legislators, because it's a majority of all those present in both committees or on the floor, provided a quorum is present. So constitutional amendments are often used, and we can expect another one on early childhood. There may be one on the decriminalization of marijuana this year. There may also be one on again, I think the governor will try to get same-sex marriage on as a constitutional amendment. And you know, it's a kind of a risky business, especially the marijuana, the decriminalization, which is something that I would like to see on the ballot, because I think it might help us bring out a lot of the younger vote that would vote more progressive. It's a very tricky thing, you know. The constitutional amendments, by their very nature, they are subject to a lot of filibustering. They're subject to a lot of amendments, it's tricky to draft them to make sure. I mean, look at the thing that was on the ballot yesterday. There are more requirements at the state level on how a constitutional amendment is drafted, but still, some of them have been struck down because they were drafted incorrectly. They log rolled 2 issues into one, and so it's tricky. And sometimes people, on the decriminalization of marijuana, for example, we've tried to pass that a number of times. Gail Chasey had a bill back Manny Adegoyan had a bill long ago, I think back in the early 90s, to do that. And then Gail Chasey had one in 2000. And also, I think Emily Kane had one this past session to decriminalize marijuana. It never gets out of committee, usually. And the one time that Gail Chasey sponsored it was in 2000. It was part of a larger package having to do with medical marijuana. And I did write about that whole issue of medical marijuana in a chapter of my book that was called Patients, Mavericks, and Heroes Beyond the Smokescreen in the Legislative Drug Wars. And that is actually the story of how we were able to get medical marijuana in New Mexico, in this rather conservative environment. And I think that, if you're new to the issue or haven't thought about that as the context for the legalization in Colorado or in Washington, that might be an interesting read. Anyway, the other thing, issues, of course, the issues themselves have context, and I'll just talk about two of them. One is education reform. Education reform is going to be a big issue, continues to be a big issue, but it has a long tail in New Mexico. And many of you remember during the Johnson administration, the Johnson administration was all about privatizing education and getting vouchers, remember? And the Democrats, though, were united, and they were able to stand up together under the leadership of Manny Aragón and Raymond Sanchez and reject that. But the compromise was charter schools. And so charter schools had started at that time. The difference was with charter schools as envisioned then and as accomplished, it was usually, local groups. It was not like it is in some other states until more recently, when these online charter academies have begun to try to get in on the act here, in on the public money here in New Mexico. And that's changed the equation considerably. But in 1996, when I went door to door, and I spoke to somebody here, Julie, I don't know where you were, whose door I knocked on then. The big question that was asked of me by the teachers' unions was, do you support education funding at 50%? And the idea there was that education funding would never fall below 50% of the budget. And at that time, it was about 53% of the budget. And of course, now it has fallen below that. And I don't know exactly what the figure is now, but it's probably something like 45%, something like that. So anyway, these efforts to privatize education are not new. Now, when it comes to health care reform, the other issue, which has really, been my major issue in the legislature. I did a whole history of health care reform in New Mexico in this book, and the title of the chapter was The Rocky Road to Health Care Reform. Warning, travelers may experience detours, speed traps, and road rage. And I really think that that's what we're experiencing now, don't you? Road rage at the national level. And it's been so depressing to me about the website and the Affordable Care Act. But I've got to say that my motto now, and I forget who it is that said this, is remain calm and carry on. Because, and who said that anyway? Some British, some British person in the Second World War, I think. But anyway, we have made progress at the state level here in New Mexico, doing bits and pieces of health care reform. I'm proud of what we've done in many respects. And then, although we haven't been able to tackle the whole enchilada, like the federal government has done, and it's only the federal government that can do it. So there will be progress made at the state level, and there will be progress made at the federal level too. And it'll be spotty, and it won't be all at one time. But I think we have to remain calm and carry on. So. And meanwhile, to resist any kind of rollbacks or any kind of sabotage. This has been sabotaged. And tone down the rhetoric because it will work. The benefits will begin to flow to people. And it'll take time. But people will begin to, once the website is fixed, people will begin to sign up. And in New Mexico, the healthcare exchange has already signed up 1,000 businesses with 4,000 employees. That ain't bad, because I remember the Health Insurance Alliance had like 7,000, after 10 years, was able to get up to 8,000 small businesses. Well, here we've had it a month, and they've gotten 1,000 already. So, regarding behavioral health, because the context of behavioral health is important too. This has been a very important issue here in New Mexico. What has happened to our behavioral health providers and how the system has been decimated. It's not the first time. And those of you who remember the turn of the last decade, back in 2000, we had a terrible crisis in behavioral health after Medicaid was put into a managed care system. And the managed care companies then subcontracted with behavioral health companies, who then subcontracted with providers. And the patient was left at the bottom of the chain with very little money. And as a result of this reorganization, residential treatment centers closed. Kids were receiving treatment for mental illness at the D-home and in the jails. And the judges started to get active in this. And Bingaman and Heather Wilson and Domenici all got together and helped us in the legislature get the federal government to deny the waiver, to say that this behavioral health should not be included in a managed care system. And we were able to do that. It was a real crisis. Unfortunately, the next year, there was a turn in administrations, and Bush came in and reinstated the waiver. But in so doing, it was conditioned on a limitation on the profits of some of these behavioral health managed care companies. So we achieved our objective, but in a different way. So this is round 2 here. And meanwhile, the system gets weaker every single time. And we're starting off with a system, remember, that is 51st in the nation in the amount of money that goes to behavioral health. And here we are with, the highest rate of drug addiction and all that. But anyway, that's some context on the behavioral health crisis. And I think Bill O'Neill and Jerry Ortiz-Pino are both going to have bills on this session.